How do you think law school transformed you?
In a lot of ways. They tell you it's going to happen. You don't think it's going to happen, but it happens. I think differently. I really do. And I can't explain it. Maybe it's more analytical. You look at everything with a question mark in your head and you question everything. At least I do. I look at every situation and I look at both sides. And I think it really does, law school really does do that.
Welcome to another episode of the First Gen 101 podcast. Today we have Nick Moustakas. Nick, thank you for being here today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
You graduated from the Elisabeth School of Law in 2024. How has that year been since you graduated?
It's been good. It's been eventful. The summer right after is like a blur. It's almost like it didn't happen. Like when I think of last summer now, because I was studying for the bar, take the bar, it's just, it's so weird to even think about that summer. It really feels like it didn't exist. Like when I think of last summer, I think of 2 years ago because the bar just consumes you so much. The bar is a big event and keeps you very busy, definitely. And then after that, just started working. So it's just been straight through from there.
We'll get to the bar exam because that in and of itself has its own challenges. Before we get there, at what point did you decide that you wanted to be a lawyer? One of the things that I ask our guests in the podcast is there's usually something that happened in students that creates that motivation or sort of that moment that sparks interest in law. What was that for you?
Yeah, for me, I think back to, I did a high school mock trial class, and I think I had an idea of wanting to potentially be a lawyer before then. So I think I took that class in my senior year of high school. I think I had thoughts of being a lawyer before then. But of course, you don't really know for sure, right? I think you start to get an idea, but you don't know for sure at that point. And I think I found that experience to be a lot of fun. And so I just remember asking a witness a question on the stand, and I was cross-examining them, and it went well. And I was like, this is what I want to do. And so I think that really is what kind of sparked my interest from there.
So it sounds like it started in high school. Going into college, where did you attend school after high school?
Yeah, so I did a year at Dutchess Community College in Poughkeepsie. I was a criminal justice major. I didn't really, at that point, it wasn't solidified that I wanted to go to law school. I was a criminal justice major. I thought about possibly becoming a police officer, and then I transferred to Pace in Pleasantville after my first year, and that's when I found out about Pace's 3+3 program, which I didn't end up doing, but really solidified my choice to go to law school. It wasn't solidified when I started college that I was definitely going to go to law school. I didn't have that figured out till another year later, but yeah.
So for our listeners, the 3+3 program, and there are undergrad institutions that have these partnerships, whether it's with the law school within the university or even other law schools, where a student can study 3 years of undergrad, and if they meet all the requirements and they take the right courses, they can take their senior year to be their first year in law school so that they complete law school in a shorter time. In other words, 3 years of undergrad, 3 years of law school, where if they're done separately, it would be 4 years of undergrad, 3 years of law school, is doing it full time. And the idea is to get students to accelerate in some way, if that's something that the student has, if they want to be lawyers. So you attended Pace undergrad, and did you work during undergrad? What was your undergrad experience like?
Yeah, so for me, undergrad, first of all, I was a commuter. So I commuted from here in Dutchess County down to Pleasantville. It was about a 45-minute drive, so it wasn't anything crazy. And I did work. My dad owns a small business that's like seasonal work for the first part of the school year up until around November or so. I would work with him when I was in school. And then during the winter, I would find a job working at a retail store or something like that until the time for working with my dad started again in the spring.
And what type of work does your dad do if he's still doing the same work or back?
Yeah, he owns a driveway steel coating business.
Hmm.
So it's like paving over or steel coating over blacktop on driveways to keep it intact and maintain it and help the blacktop last longer.
For your parents, what was there when you told them that you wanted to go to law school, you started preparing for law school? How did your parents support you, or what was their advice to you in the process?
Yeah, I think my parents were absolutely on board with me the whole time. They were always very supportive. I remember in high school when, here's a spoiler for you, I wasn't the greatest high school student. Okay, I just not that committed in high school, which you're a teenager and you're doing what you want to do. And so I'll preface it with that. And I remember when I told my guidance counselor that I possibly wanted to go to law school, my parents were there. And I remember him saying, that might be a little far-fetched, might be a little out of reach. Because at the time, I wasn't getting into Harvard, that's for sure. From high school, I remember my parents just being so furious with that statement, just because they were like, if you want to do something, you can absolutely do it. And clearly they were right. So they've always been very supportive.
Oh, Nick, that experience you're sharing with us, I've heard that similar statement at least 4 times now in previous episodes. And now I'm wondering, what do you think that is? And what do you think? And there are a lot of great guidance counselors out there, don't get me wrong. But why would someone, so I guess from your perspective, why would someone who's there to support a student would say something like that? Have you ever thought about maybe there's something about the way students are being advised? What are your thoughts about hearing something like that?
I understand why my parents were very upset about it, but for me, it just lit a fire under me, I think, and wanted to prove him wrong. And I remember a friend of mine too, I told him I wanted to go to law school, and he was like, dude, come on. And I think those kinds of things excite you and light a fire under you and motivate you to prove people wrong. And I think that's certainly what it did for me. Now, why might a guidance counselor say that? I think they try to find a good, happy medium of motivating people, but also keeping expectations realistic. Now, in high school, is that entirely necessary to keep expectations realistic? I think so. You certainly don't want to just tell someone, oh, yeah, you can just go to law school or go to medical school or do whatever, because they might think they can do it without putting in the hard work that it takes to get there. So I think they try to manage expectations, if I had to guess, but I'm not really sure. If I had to guess, it's definitely to keep expectations well managed. At the same time, maybe they're trying to light a fire under people. I don't know. I know that guidance counselor. I know him personally. He actually does the same kind of work that my dad does during the summer. And he's a great guy. And, I remember I called him when I found out I got into law school. And he was like, you proved me wrong. So he's a good guy. And I think it was part him trying to motivate me because he knew me well. He knew what motivated me, but also trying to manage my expectations a little bit, which is fair.
And it jumps at me because one of the things that we've heard in past episodes is that, and the reason why I started, if you remember that moment, is because there are very specific moments in people's life, whether it's something that happened to them or if there was a person, whether it's a mentor or in this case, someone who made a statement that can really either motivate someone or even discourage someone. And so that that could go both ways. So I'm always curious to know perspectives about that. So you're going through college and you realize that maybe the 3+3 program was not the best fit at that point. And before we jump into the actual application process, what did you ever have any law related internships during college? Any experiences that sort of gave you an insight to what it's like to be a lawyer?
I didn't have any internships that were law related in college. I did shadow an attorney once for a couple of days down in White Plains, and that was it was a couple of days, so it wasn't a great real insight into what being an attorney is, but it was good to see like just what a day or two might look like. So I didn't do anything beyond that really. I did Model UN, which there were certainly some people who would be like on the boards and things like that who went to law school or things like that, and had brief conversations with them about it. One of my professors was a lawyer who just graduated from PACE when she was teaching a class, and she knew everybody in the class was interested in going to law school, so she would talk about it a lot. But yeah, those were my experiences in undergrad. I didn't do any long-term internships though.
And so going into the actual law school process, could think, and again, you know this going through the law school education and the process, it's very unique and it's very demanding. And I want to make sure that we spend enough time on that because I think that's really helpful to prospective law students, especially first gen who don't know what to expect and just don't know what it's like to go to law school and to go through that process. So you decide to go to law school, and what was the I guess the challenge? What was the hardest piece of preparing for law school? Is it the LSAT? Is it deciding where you're gonna go? What was the biggest challenge right before getting into law school?
Yeah, so I think as far as challenges, where I wanted to go was definitely the lowest on the list just because I went to PACE. I liked PACE, and I knew they had a law school, and I wanted to do the 3-3 program for a while. It wasn't until COVID happened that I decided it was best to just hold off, wait till I graduate, and then I'd hopefully be in person for my first year. So because I wanted to do the 3-3 program, PACE was always like my top choice just because the 3-3 program was always there. So that was definitely on the low end of stressors for preparing for law school, at least for me. I think the highest stressor, the highest challenge, the biggest challenge was the LSAT, I think, for me. I didn't do any kind of commercial tutoring or anything like that. I really just taught myself for the most part. I remember I did like a 1 or 2 night quick little trial course at PACE, I think, and that was helpful. But the LSAT's tough, and especially teaching yourself was difficult. And I was just trying to get whatever score I needed to get into law school. It was a tough challenge to get there and to do the practice over and over again when you're just some of those questions, just I have no idea what I was doing. So that was definitely the biggest challenge for me.
And after you take the LSAT, you think you're done, and then you start law school and you realize that you have to continue putting all those hours into studying. And then we'll talk about that in a moment. How was the day before orientation? Was it something like, I'm just going to go? Or were there concerns or maybe hesitations, nervous? What did that night before orientation look like for you?
I'll tell you this. I remember the weekend before I went out to the Hamptons with my now fiance and her family. Her uncle, I think, rented a house for the weekend or something like that and invited us to go, which was very nice. And I remember on Saturday, there was a huge storm coming in, and they were, I think, telling people to evacuate because it was going to be real bad. And that's Saturday, and my orientation's Monday. I was planning on leaving Sunday morning, and I'm like, I got to get out of here because if I get stuck here and I miss my orientation, it's going to be a disaster. So I left. I left like Saturday around 2 o'clock, and I didn't get home till about 10 p.m. And that's from the Hamptons to Poughkeepsie. It shouldn't take you 8 hours to get home. But there was so much traffic because people were evacuating there. It just took forever. So anyway, that was 2 days before. But the day before, I think I was just trying to figure out what I needed to do. There was some homework that they asked us to complete before we went that I still had to get done. So it was a lot of that, a lot of kind of rereading through everything, making sure felt prepared to go in and just letting the nerves cool down a little bit.
So you go through the process of orientation, and then you might remember that it's very general, and a lot of people speaking and giving you support and advice to start your education. But then really, and so from my experience, I see that into the second or third week, maybe the month in of your first semester, that's when, in my experience, I see people's faces change. A lot of them seem concerned or worried or just stressed because now they're really going through the readings and the classes, etc. At what point in your first semester did you realize this is unlike anything I've done? Or was it like unlike anything you've done? What was that sort of realization that this is more than just undergrad? It requires more time.
Driving home from orientation the very first day. I was going through it. I was already ready to leave.
Oh.
Left orientation, literally the first day of orientation, thinking this is just not for me. And I think the people they brought in to speak were all very good, and they brought in students, which was good. Gave you some good insight. For me, that insight just scared the hell out of me. And I thought this was just going to be crazy, right? I didn't understand how there was the curve, right? And that scares everybody. And they really pushed on how there's all these readings every night. You're going to have all these readings. And it really just, I think, scared me a bit. And I didn't think I could keep up with all of that. But yeah, it was the leaving orientation that I was like, oh man, what did I get myself into?
There are instances when working in admissions, I've seen a few people who will drop and they just decide this is definitely not for me. And we understand why. When you started going through your classes and doing your readings, were you one of those students who studied as a group? Did you study on your own? How did you get and push through the material and the readings? Because the readings, forget about the time you spend reading, but the readings themselves are just very challenging because the language is very different. How was that process of getting through being successful? Was it mostly on your own? Did you rely on other peers, dean scholars? What was that process like for you?
Yeah, so for me, I definitely read on my own, studied on my own. Frankly, during my whole first semester, honestly, I was a foot out the door. I was not planning on going back after the first semester. So I really didn't put in the effort that I should have during my first semester. And so I ended up waiting a long time to start studying for finals, any prospective first year law students, please don't do that. It's just not in your best interests, in my opinion. It worked out fine. I was able to push through and get it done. And I did good enough considering that I waited so long to start studying. But that was a challenge, waiting till the end to realize that, okay, I'm gonna stay. It wasn't until probably 2 weeks before finals that I was committed to staying after the first semester. And so that's when I decided to put in the effort. But that was the biggest part, was just finding, okay, how do I do enough to just get by here at least and save face? Because like I said, I was a foot out the door the whole time.
Through this process of doubting and maybe leaving law school at a certain point, did you communicate that to your parents? How was that?
Yeah, so I was completely open about it. I told my fiance, I was my now fiance. We weren't engaged at the time, but I told her, I think I'm done. I told my parents, I'm done. I'm not doing this. This is crazy. Not going to work out. And they were just very supportive, frankly. They said, oh, if you don't think you can do it, then don't do it. Don't make a decision that you're going to regret later on. But they reassured me that they weren't telling me that because they also thought I couldn't do it. It was, they wanted me to know that they knew I had the ability to push through and it'll go away eventually. These scary feelings will go away eventually. And eventually you'll find your footing and you'll hit a groove and it'll all be okay. And they were 100%, but they were completely supportive if I wanted to make the choice to not go through with it.
Something that I hear from students, especially as they go into their second year. I don't know that it happens going into your second year, your 12th year, but for many students, that's when I notice it. In some ways, it something clicks, and I don't want to say there's some sort of like magic. I don't want to put it that way, but there's something that happens in the process that you finally get it, and it seems less overwhelming than it was during your first semester. What would you say for you was that moment, or what do you think clicked that you felt, okay, I understand? You mentioned getting into a groove. When did you feel like you had a better understanding of what was going on?
Like you said, it was the very beginning of my 2L year. Even during my second semester of my first year, it was still new. I think I enjoyed the classes a little more. I think I found the classes more interesting. I think what is it in your second semester? It's contracts, property, con law, and and legal writing. And I think I found those topics a little more interesting and they gelled with me a little more. But it wasn't until my second year, first semester, that I felt extremely comfortable. I was taking evidence with Professor Griffin, and it just clicked with me. Evidence just clicked with me. And it was the first class that I felt like I knew what I was doing. It's just something about the way you applied the rules that just felt natural to me and it just worked. It just clicked in my brain and I was able to take that confidence and build on it. And my grades greatly improved from my first year. And I really think evidence was like the first class that gave me some confidence to think, okay, I can do this. Like I was completely comfortable at that point.
For our prospective students, or just anybody who may be interested in law school, Nick mentioned a few courses, and as a 1L, as a 1L student in your first year, so 1L first year, we use the terms interchangeably, you're assigned the same classes and everyone takes the same courses. They are the foundational courses that not only are pivotal or vital for law school, but they're also part of the bar exam, which I want to touch on that in a moment. And then second and third year, you start taking courses that interest you, depending on what you want to pursue, or just general electives that you want to learn about different topics. And on that note, and we haven't talked about this yet, what area of law were you interested at the time? And are you practicing the area of law that you came in thinking about? What was that process of deciding what area of law versus what you're doing now?
Yeah. So I think when I came into law school, I wanted to do corporate law stuff. I think I found it interesting and how that translated. Now I work in a general practice firm. We handle everything, which includes some corporate work. So we do real estate, we do estate administration, estate planning, municipal law, just kind of everything, right? It's not what I imagined doing like when I first came to law school to an extent, but I don't know if many people stay on the same, do the same, follow the path that they wanted to do. I don't know why I wanted to do corporate law, frankly. I think it just sounded great, but yeah, I didn't end up following that path, but I think that's extremely common.
No, it's more common than even when I came into the admissions world. I've heard, and even recently, as we're preparing the next class, is I want to pursue this area of law, and they're very keen on it, and I'm glad to see that. And we often do just advise, hey, that might be an interest that will stick with you, but also be open-minded to other practices as you go through law school for many reasons. Could be because the economy is not favorable to the area of law that you're interested, or you might just find other interests as you take classes or as you meet professors. One of the things that I want to emphasize, and I want to get your take on this, how was the process of mentorship? Because that is I find that's a big element that helps students get through law school, especially as a first year student. What was the process and how did you find mentors in law school? Who did you go to for support when you needed additional guidance?
Yeah, it's a great question. I had a great mentor. I had Stephanie Desiato. She teaches in the ASAP program and the bar classes and things like that. I remember I had a class with her during my second year, my first semester, and I knew that she was knowledgeable on kind of the whole overall law school experience. She wasn't the like professor who was teaching in one of the big classes who she was a good mentor in just talking about the process. And I think she was great. She was always there to take a question when I had it. So she was a good mentor. And then I also think I had a friend who is from the same area as me in Dutchess County. We were in law school together. We met during our orientation week, and he had a similar kind of experience as me, I think, where he was a first generation law student, didn't know many attorneys. And so he was always good to just talk to about like all that's going on, like all the experiences that we were experiencing together because we took a lot of classes together and just not being, it was good to have a friend that was in a similar spot. So he wasn't, I wouldn't say he was a mentor, but it was just a great person to talk to about all the new experiences. Because, like I said, we really just were not experienced at all with knowing attorneys or networking and things like that. So it was good to have that person as well.
One of the things that I've noticed about students, as far as building camaraderie, all law students are sectioned. In other words, when you arrive, we have the class, whether it's 110, 210, whatever the number is, and you're typically divided into sections. And that's a common practice in all law schools. And I find that students who are in the same section tend to really bond, especially with shared experiences. And that bond goes even after law school. And you go through your process, and then there's the bar exam. So you graduate, you have that moment of attending commencement and celebrating with your families. But then, unlike other graduate degrees, it doesn't end there. There's still the bar exam if you want to practice law. And that usually it's shortly after graduation. Tell me about your bar prep process, because that in and of itself, it's a big deal. Your ability to practice law really hangs on that. What was a bar preparation like for you, and how was that those moments leading up to taking the bar exam?
Yeah. So for me, was a little unorthodox. I knew that the first year subjects were not going to be my strong suit. Like I said, I was a foot out the door, right, for at least the first semester. And I just was, I felt that I did not have a good grasp on those subjects. So I started as soon as the bar courses opened up in March. And it wasn't just do a little bit here and do a little bit there. I was full time pretty
Mm.
much to the extent I could be while I was still in class. We had about a month left or so. So when I wasn't in school, I was studying for the bar. That was about late March, I think. And for people who don't know, typically you start around graduation, which is towards the end of May, mid-May. And it's about 10 weeks of studying. But I just knew I was going to spend a lot of time on those subjects those core subjects that I just didn't feel confident in. And so I started pretty early. And the good part of that was it gave me a ton of time to be comfortable with not understanding something, having to go back and relearn it if I needed to. And felt by the end of it, I just felt like I couldn't do any more, and not from a being tired standpoint, but just I just didn't know what else to do anymore. Like I had just done so much by the last week before the test. I just ran out of things I was starting to do for essays over again and things like that because I just over prepared, but I was happy that I did.
This, what you're describing, is really important. And starting, you basically you started bar prep, as you said, much earlier than what's typical. And that is a big point because you knew where you're needed to improve. And so that's really a good way to approach it because there's students that could say, hey, bar prep will take care of that for me. But it's really important that as a mature person to say, hey, I really struggle in this part. I need to address it because what's challenging about the bar besides the content itself is you sit for the bar exam, if you take it in July, and then you don't get your score until October or November, October, November. So you have all those months where you're just waiting and you don't know what's going to happen. And then if you don't pass, then you have to go through the process again in the winter. So taking that approach was really smart. And all of you who are listening, make a special note to that, when you're in law school, be very frank and honest with yourself and say, hey, this is what I need to work on and do it. As we get to, as we start closing, Nick, one of the things that I hear regularly, and I heard this yesterday during commencement, the idea that law school is a transformative experience. How do you think law school transformed you?
Oh, geez. In a lot of ways, definitely not the same. One, I think I'm a little more serious than I was, for better or for worse, who knows? But that's one thing. And the other is that I think they tell you it's going to happen. You don't think it's going to happen, but it happens. I think differently. I really do. And I can't explain it. Maybe it's more analytical. You look at everything with a question mark in your head. You question everything. At least I do. I look at every situation and I look at both sides. And I think law school really does do that. I think it's just got to be the cases, reading those cases. You see just how the judges write. They're, for the most part, they usually, they analyze both sides when the judges write opinions. And I think that just trains you to always look at it like that. So I think that's definitely something where, it changes the way you think. They tell you it's going to happen. You always hear it. And you're like, no, what do you mean it's going to change the way I think? What does that even mean? And it does. You think differently.
What was your favorite part of law school?
I think fun learning it's just fun. God, go and tell high school me that. Like, probably laugh in your face, but it's fun. I found the material interesting. And then the other thing was being a Dean Scholar. I was the Dean Scholar for Evidence in my last year. And that was probably like just the best experience that I had during law school itself. I also interned at the firm that I work at now, and that was a fantastic experience as well. But as far as like in school, being a Dean Scholar was my favorite part. I just loved teaching the subject evidence. It was by far my favorite subject. And I was passionate about helping other people learn it who evidence is a hard subject for a lot of people. They don't, for me, I thought it just clicked in my brain. For other people, it does the opposite. And I loved helping other people learn how to get it to click.
What is a Dean Scholar?
A Dean Scholar is someone who holds sessions each week for a particular professor and a particular subject. So typically your professors especially in your first year you'll only have them for one subject. So all my professors were different in my first year. So each professor has a Dean Scholar for a particular class. So for me, I was Professor Griffin's Evidence Dean Scholar. And they hold a weekly session or 2 weekly sessions where the class can attend and you go over the material that was covered the week prior to help reinforce that material and to answer any questions that people would feel nervous about asking the professor. Because there's 75 people typically, I think, around in each class. People will get nervous about asking a question in front of everyone or asking the professor a question. So people will come and ask questions, or we'd go over the material. We would do hypos to make sure we're understanding the material. And that's the gist of it. Like a class tutor is how I would describe it.
Great. For those of you who are considering PACE, a Dean Scholar is actually very unique to PACE, and it's one of the ways that we support our students academically. And what do you miss about law school? Now you're working, and I suppose you're not doing a lot of studying. Maybe you're doing professional development and stuff, but what do you miss about law school generally?
I think I'm learning every day at work, right? Because I'm a new attorney. Every day is I'm learning something new, whether it's about professionalism or how to be a better writer, or just from experience. I have very experienced attorneys that I work with. So I do learn every day, but I do the really intellectual learning part of law school. I think learning a new subject is fun, especially when you have a great professor. There's just, you're not, I wouldn't say you're excited to go to class. Let's be honest, but you don't mind going to that class. That's a great thing. And I miss that, learning a new subject and getting it, understanding it. That's a great feeling when it clicks. A lot of law school classes, and this is good information for people who are considering. It's not like in undergrad and like in high school, you do things by units, and you do that in law school too. But in law school, for me at least, the whole semester, you're just like, how is this going to fit together? Like high school and undergrad, the units are like all separate and they really don't all fit together in the end. And so you can understand each individual unit as you go. But in law school, at least in my experience, the whole semester, you're just wondering what in the world is going on. And then you study for your finals, and all of a sudden you see how all of these things intertwine, and you zoom out and you understand it. Maybe during the semester, you were just like, I don't understand what in the world this means. I don't get this. And then at the end, it all fits like a puzzle. It's a good feeling when you finally get to that point and you did all your studying and you feel confident going into a test and you just understand it all. That's a great feeling.
I like how you explained it, that when you look at it individually or you're zooming in, you don't get to see how it fits. But once you zoom out and see the big picture, then you see how it fits and maybe you see patterns. And that's great, because for those who are considering law school or who are going through law school, it's important to have that focus, but also step back, take a mindful approach, not a mindful, but really an intentional approach of, let me see how this all fits in, and be intentional about it so that you don't just get stuck and then you don't see where this is going. And maybe that could be a reason why many students get frustrated and even end up leaving. I'm glad you mentioned that. So to close, Nick, what does the future look like?
Yeah, so I think, like I said, the firm I work at, the attorneys are just there's a lot of experience there, and they're great to work with. And I hope I plan to be here for a long time at this firm. There's a lot of growth potential and just a lot to learn from some very well respected attorneys. So I think for me, I think as far as growth, like I want to get to the point where I feel I totally know what I'm doing. I think it's normal when you start anything. And I've been there for a little less than a year now, but you're still new and you're still new to practice. And I just hope I can grow into a a great lawyer and a complete lawyer who's versed. And I think the people who work at this firm definitely give me the opportunity to do that, because that's how I would describe the partners at this firm are just complete attorneys. They're not just good at one thing or focus on one thing. They have a lot of experience in a lot of things, and I hope to learn from them.
Nick, thank you again. I'm so happy that you share your experiences and you were so open. I'm glad that during those moments when you felt like you were ready to quit, that you didn't, and now you're seeing how worth it was for you to stick it out for the 3 years and through the bar exam. So, Nick, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. For those of you listening, thank you for following and watch out for the next episode. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.